I hate that it always does that lag at the beginning. Anyway, so I am on lunch break, and so we're gonna read some more today. Let's see where we left off. Okay, so we are on chapter 6 now. Alright. Okay. Nazi bombers attacked Warsaw and 1,150 sorties. I don't know what that means. Neighborhoods, maybe? Anyway, Nazi bombers attacked Warsaw and 1,150 sorties, devastating the zoo, which happened to lie near anti-aircraft guns. On that clear day, the sky broke open and whistling fire hurtled down. Cages exploded, moats rained upward, iron bars squealed as they wrenched apart. Wooden buildings collapsed, sucked down by heat. Glass and metal shards mutilated skin. Oh god. Feathers, hooves, and scales indiscriminately as wounded zebras ran, ribboned with blood. Terrified howler monkeys and orangutans dashed caterwauling into trees and bushes. Snakes slithered loose, and crocodiles pushed onto their toes and trotted at speed. Bullets ripped open the aviary nets, and parrots spiraled upwards like Aztec gods and plummeted straight down. Other tropicals hid in the shrubs and trees or tried to fly with singed wings. That was rough. Some animals, hiding in their cages and basins, became engulfed by rolling waves of flame. 2 giraffes lay dead on the ground, legs twisted, shockingly horizontal. The clotted air hurt to breathe and stank of burning wood, straw, and flesh. The monkeys and birds, screeching infernally, created an otherworldly chorus backed by a crackling timpani of bullets and bomb blasts. Echoing around the zoo, the tumult surely sounded like 10,000 furies. I thought it said furries for a second. That's not funny. The tumult surely sounded like 10,000 furies scratching up from hell to unhinge the world. That's gotta be awful. They're, I can hear the people around me, they're doing yard work. I don't know if you can hear that or not, but I hear it. Antonia and a handful of keepers ran through the grounds trying to rescue some animals and release others while dodging injury themselves. Running from one cage to the next, she also worried about her husband fighting at the front, a brave man, a man of conscience. And if even innocent animals aren't safe, what hope has he? And when he returned, what would he find? Then another thought collided. Where was Kesa, the mother elephant, one of their favorites? At last she arrived at Kesa's enclosure, only just to discover it leveled and her gone, already killed by a shell, Antonia would later learn. Oh god, that's awful! But she could hear 2-year-old baby Tzinka trumpeting in the distance. Many monkeys had died in a pavilion fire or were shot, and others hooted wildly as they scampered through the shrubs and trees. Miraculously, some animals survived the zoo, and many escaped across the bridge, entering Old Town while the capital burned. People brave enough to stand by their windows or unlucky enough to be outside watched a biblical hallucination unfolding as the zoo emptied into Warsaw streets. I'm suddenly getting an image of Jumanji whenever all the animals are just running through the house and then running through the streets. Oh my god. Yeah, this is not the time, but oh god, that's awful. I can't. Oh god, these poor animals. I know this didn't really happen, but still. The thought is horrifying. Okay, where was I? I'm sorry. Nope, I was going to read that sentence again. Oh yeah, emptied into Warsaw streets. Seals waddled along the banks of the Vistula. Camels and llamas wandered down alleyways, hooves skidding on cobblestone. Ostriches and antelope trotted beside foxes and wolves, and anteaters called out, "Hachi, hachi," as they scuttled over bricks. I don't know what sound anteaters make. Locals saw blurs of fur and hide bolting past factories and apartment houses, racing to outlying fields of oat, buckwheat, and flax, scrambling into creeks, hiding in stairwells and sheds. Submerged in their wallows, the hippos, otters, and beavers survived. Somehow the bears, bison, and Przewalski horses, camels, zebras, lynxes, peacocks, and other birds, monkeys, and reptiles survived too. Antonio wrote of stopping a young soldier near the villa and asking, "Have you seen a large badger?" He said some badger banged and scratched on the villa door for a long time, but when we didn't let it in, it disappeared through the bushes. Poor badger, she's lamented. Yeah, I'm so sad right now. Poor badger, she lamented as she pictured the family pets frightened appeals at the door. Oh God, this is so sad. After a moment, "I hope he managed to escape," clouded her mind. The heat and smoke resumed. Her legs returned, and she ran to check the bristle-maned horses from Magnolia. The other horses and donkeys, including her son's pony, Figlars, which means prankster, lay dead. Oh God! The other horses and donkeys, including her son's pony, lay dead in the streets. But somehow the rare Przewalski horses trembled upright in their pasture. Antonia finally left the zoo and crossed Praski Park between rows of linden trees haloed in fire, and headed back to the lampshade store downtown where she and her son sheltered. Blurred and drained, she tried to describe the plumes of smoke, the uprooted trees and grass, the blood-splattered buildings and carcasses. Then, when she felt a little calmer, she made her way to a stone building at number 1 Miodowa Street, and climbed the stairs to a small office crammed with agitated people and cascading piles of documents, one of the Resistance's secret lairs where she met an old friend, Adam Englert. "Any news?" "Apparently our army is out of ammunition and supplies and discussing official surrender," he said bleakly. In her memoirs, she wrote that she heard him speak, but his words floated away from her as was if her brain, already choked by the day's horrors, had issued a non-servient and refused to absorb any more. Sitting down heavily on a couch, she felt glued in place. Until this moment, she hadn't let herself believe that her country might really lose its independence. Again. If occupation wasn't new, neither was ousting the enemy, but it had been 21 years since the last war with Germany. Most of Antonia's life and the prospect stunned her. For 10 years, the zoo had seemed principality all its own, protected by the moat of the Vistula, the daily life a jigsaw puzzle fit for her avid sensibility. Back at the lampshade store, she told everyone the sorry news she'd heard from Englert, which didn't agree with Polish Mayor Starzynski's upbeat radio broadcasts, in which he denounced the Nazis, offered hope, and rallied everyone to defend the capital at all costs. "While speaking to you now," he said on one occasion, "I can see it through the window in its greatness and glory, shrouded in smoke, red in flames, glorious, invincible, fighting Warsaw." Puzzled, they wondered whom to believe, the mayor in a public speech, or the members of the resistance. Surely the latter. In another broadcast, Starzynski had used the past tense at one point. "I wanted Warsaw to be a great city. I believed that it would be great. My associates and I drew up plans made of sketches of a great Warsaw of the future. In light of Starzynski's tense, was it a slip? Antonia's news rang truer, and everyone's mood fell, as the owners edged among the tables, switching on small lamps. Several days later, after Warsaw's surrender, Antonia sat at a table with the others, hungry but too depressed to eat the little food in front of her. When she heard a crisp knock at the door, no one visited anymore. No one bought lamps or fixed broken lampshades. Anxiously, the owners opened the door a crack, and to her astonishment, there stood Jan, looking exhausted and relieved. Hugs and kisses followed, and then he sat down at the table and told them his story. It's going to be a doozy, I bet. When Jan and his friends had left Warsaw weeks before on the evening of September 7th, they followed the river and walked towards Brzesk on Bug. As part of a phantom army looking for a unit to join, not finding one, they finally split up, and on September 25th, Jan overnighted in Maine at a farm whose owners he knew from summers at the cottage, because I can't say that word. You know, the cottage. The following morning, the housekeeper woke him to ask if he'd translate for her with a German officer who had arrived during the night. Any encounter with a Nazi was dangerous, and as Jan dressed, he tried to prepare himself for trouble and rehearse possible scenarios. Taking the stairs with the feigned confidence of a legitimate houseguest, he kept his eye on the Wehrmacht officer. I only say that because I'm pretty sure that in German the W's are pronounced as V's. So I don't know. Anyway, he kept his eye on the German officer standing in the living room, discussing provisions with the owners. As the Nazi turned to face him, disbelief washed over Jan, and he wondered if he were seeing something churned up by his jumpy heart. But in the same instant, the officer's face flashed surprise, and he smiled. There stood Dr. Mueller, a fellow member of the International Association of Zoo Directors, who directed the zoo at Kralwijk in eastern Prussia, and known as Kleinsenberg before the war. Laughing, Mueller said, "I know only one Pole, well, you, my friend, and I meet you here. How did this happen?" A supply officer, Mueller had come to the farm seeking food for his troops. When he told Jan of Warsaw's catastrophe and the zoos, Jan wanted to return immediately, and Mueller offered to help, but warned that Polish men of Jan's age weren't safe on the roads. The best plan, he suggested, was to arrest Jan and drive to Warsaw with him as a prisoner, and despite their past cordiality, Jan worried if Mueller could be trusted. Yeah, I would not trust that my own self. I'd be very suspicious. But true to his word, Mueller returned when Warsaw surrendered and drove Jan deep into the city as he dared, hoping to meet in happier days. They said goodbye, and Jan slid through the ruins of the city, wondering if he'd ever reach Kapuscinka Street, Antonia and Rice, if they were even alive. At last he found the 4-story building, and when his first knock brought no response, he nearly toppled from dread. In the following days, Warsaw's fierce quiet grew unnerving, so Jan and Antonia decided to steal across the bridge to the zoo, this time with no shells or snipers peppering them. Several of the old keepers had also returned and taken up their usual chores as sort of a ghost brigade working in a half-massacred village where the guardhouse and quarters now were charred hills, and the workshops, elephant house, whole habitats and enclosures had also burned or collapsed. Strangest of all, many cage bars had melted into grotesque shapes that looked like the work of avant-garde welders. Jan and Antonia walked by the villa, shocked by a scene that looked even more surrealist than before. Although the villa had survived, its tall windows were shattered by bomb blasts, and fine particles of glass lay everywhere like sand mixed with crushed straw from when Polish soldiers had sheltered there during air raids. Everything needed fixing, especially the windows. And because panes of glass were a rare commodity, they decided to use plywood for a while, though it meant sealing themselves off even more. Excuse me. But first they began a quest for wounded animals, combing the ground, searching in even unlikely hiding places. A cheer rose whenever someone found an animal trapped beneath debris, confused and hungry but alive. Oh my god, this just makes me really. Oh my god, the thought of those poor scared animals makes me so depressed right now. Oh, I can't do this. According to Antonia, many of the army's dead horses lay with swollen bellies, grinning teeth, eyes frozen wide open in fear. This is so sad! All of the corpses needed to be buried or butchered, with antelope, deer, and horse meat distributed to the city's hungry. Not something Jan and Antonia could face, so they left it to the keepers, and at nightfall, exhausted and depressed, the villa uninhabitable, they returned to Capucinca Street. The next day, General Rommel spoke on the radio, urging Warsaw soldiers and citizens to accept surrender with dignity and stay calm while the German army marched into their fallen city. His broadcast ended with, "I rely on the population of Warsaw, which stood bravely in its defense and displayed its profound patriotism, to accept the entry of German forces quietly, honorably, and calmly." Maybe it's good news, Antonia told herself. Maybe it's peace at last and the chance to rebuild. After a rainy morning, thick cloud banks shifted and a warm October sunlight began streaming through as German soldiers patrolled each neighborhood, filling the streets with the clop of heavy boot heels and gabble in a foreign tongue. Then different sounds filtered into the lampshade's door, more sibilant and transparent. Crowd voices of Polish men and women. Antonia saw one large organism flowing slowly downtown and people trickling out of buildings to join it. Where do you suppose they're going? The radio told them where Hitler was preparing to review his troops, and she and Jan felt the same osmotic force tugging them outside. Everywhere Antonia looked lay destruction. In her jotting she described buildings guillotined by the war, their roofs gone, sitting in misshapen poses, and somewhere in nearby backyards. Other buildings looked sad, ripped up by bombs from top to basement. They reminded her of people embarrassed by their wounds, looking for a way to cover the openings in their abdomens. Next, Antonia and Jan passed rain-soaked buildings, missing their plaster, with exposed blood-red bricks steaming in the warm sunshine. Fire still burned, the entrails of homes still smoldering, filled the air with enough smoke to make eyes tear and throats tighten. Hypnotized, the swelling crowd flowed to the center of the city. In archival films, one can see them lining the main streets, down which conquering German soldiers march in steady torrent of gunmetal gray uniforms, their steps echoing like ropes walloping hardwood. Jan turned to Antonia, who looked faint. "I can't breathe," she said. "I feel like I'm drowning in a gray sea, like they're flooding the whole city, washing away our past and people, dashing everything from the face of the earth." Jammed inside the crowd, they watched gleaming tanks and guns stream by, and ruddy-faced soldiers, with some stares Jan found so provocative he had to turn away. Puppet theater, a popular art form in Poland, wasn't just for children, but often grappled with satiric and political subjects, as it had in ancient Rome. Old films show what locals must have found ironic. A loud brass band heralding waves of glossy cavalry and strutting battalions, and Hitler reigning on a platform farther down the avenue, reviewing the troops with one hand held aloft like a puppeteer twitching invisible strings. Delegates from Poland's main political parties were already meeting in the strong room of a savings bank to refine the underground, which nearly began with success. Explosives planted beneath Hitler's platform were supposed to blow him to crumbs. Oh, that can't go well. But at the last minute, a German official moved the bomber to another spot, and he couldn't face and couldn't light the fuse. The city quickly spasmed into German hands, banks closed, salaries dried up. Antonia and Jan moved back to the villa, but stripped of money and supplies, they scavenged for food left by the Polish soldiers who had belated there. Sorry, I keep burping. Ugh. The new German colony was ruled by Hitler's personal lawyer, Hans Frank, an early member of the Nazi Party and a leading jurist busy revising German laws according to Nazi philosophy, especially racist laws and those aimed at the resistance. During his first month in office, Governor General Frank declared that any Jews leaving the district to which people had been confined would be killed, as would people who deliberately offer a hiding place to such Jews. Instigators and helpers are subject to the same punishment as perpetrators. An attempted act will be punished in the same way as a completed act. Soon afterward, he had issued the decree for the combating of violent acts, which imposed death on anyone disobeying German authority, mounting acts of sabotage or arson, owning a gun or other weapons, attacking a German, violating curfew, owning a radio, trading on the black market, having underground leaflets in the home, or failing to report scofflaws who did. Breaking laws or failing to report lawbreakers, both acting or observing, were equally punishable offenses. Human nature being what it is, most people didn't wish to get involved, so few people were denounced, and fewer still denounced for not denouncing others. In what could quickly have become an absurdist chain of disinclination and inaction. Somewhere between doing and not doing, everyone's conscience finds its own level. Most Poles didn't risk their lives for fugitives, but didn't denounce them either. Hitler authorized Frank to ruthlessly exploit this region as a war zone and booty country, and reduce to a heap of rubble its economic, social, cultural, and political structure. One of Frank's key tasks was to kill all people of influence, such as teachers. Whoa, holy shit. Sorry. One of Frank's key tasks was to kill all people of influence, such as teachers, priests, landowners, politicians, lawyers, and artists. Wow! Then he began rearranging huge masses of the population over a span of 5 years. 860,000 Poles would be uprooted and resettled. 75,000 Germans would take over their lands. 1,300,000 Poles would be shipped to Germany as slave labor, and 330,000 would simply be shot. Jesus Christ! With courage and ingenuity. Okay. The Polish resistance would sabotage German equipment, derail trains, blow up bridges, print over 1,100 periodicals, make radio broadcasts. How are you gonna listen to that? Oh, sorry. It was the Polish resistance. I was just thinking, how are you gonna listen to that if it's supposed to be illegal to own a radio? Teaching covert high schools and colleges, attended by 100,000 students. Aid Jews in hiding, supply arms, make bombs, assassinate Gestapo agents, rescue prisoners, stage secret plays, publish books, lead feats of civil resistance, hold its own law courts, and run couriers to and from the London-based government in exile. Its military wing, the Home Army, at its height included 380,000 soldiers, among them Jan Zabinski, who later told interviewers, "From the very beginning, I was connected to the Home Army in the area of the zoo." Confusing as life during occupation must have been, the clandestine Polish state, linked by luggage rather than territory, would fight nonstop for 6 years. A key to the underground strength was its no contact upward policy and the unflagging use of pseudonyms and cryptonyms. If no one knew his superior, capture wouldn't endanger the Corps. And if no one knew anyone's real name, saboteurs proved hard to find. Underground headquarters floated around the city, and schools migrated from one church or apartment to another, while a band of couriers and illegal print shops kept everyone informed. The underground peasant movement adopted the slogan of as little as late and as bad as possible, and set about sabotaging deliveries to Germans and diverting supplies to people in the cities, repeatedly claiming delivery of the same grain or livestock, overstating receipts, conveniently losing, destroying, or hiding provisions. Forced laborers in the secret German rocket program at Pini somewhere that I can't pronounce, and I'm just gonna butcher it. Anyway, forced laborers at the secret German rocket program at that place urinated on the electronics to corrode them, crippling the rockets. The resistance encompassed so many cells that anyone could find a niche, regardless of age, education, or nerve. Jan had a penchant for risk, which he later told a reporter he found exciting, adding to his understated way that its pulse-revving gamble felt rather like playing chess. Either I win or I lose. Wow, that's almost inspirational. Alright, that was a lot, so I'm not gonna read chapter 7. I mean, maybe, let's see how long it is. I'll just go ahead and read chapter 7. This is gonna be a long video, so I'll just go ahead and read that because it's a pretty short chapter, so oh well. Alright, so chapter 7. It is hot up in this car. That's probably too loud. Okay. Alright, chapter 7. With autumn, cold began seeping under doors and through tiny cracks, and at night, hoarse winds dashed across the villa's flat roof, billowed any plywood shutters that had warped, squalled around the walled terrace. Despite its disheveled buildings and lawns, the zoo bedded down its few remaining animals for the winter, but nothing looked the way it had before the war. Least of all, the seasonal tableau of zoo life. The tempo of the days used to change dramatically as the zoo entered its own period of hibernation. Boulevards, normally crowded with as many as 10,000 people during the summer holiday, would grow almost deserted. A few people would visit the monkey house, the elephants and the predator islands, or the seal pool. But the long columns of schoolchildren waiting in line to ride llamas, ponies, camels, or little pedal cars would evaporate. Delicate animals like flamingos and pelicans venturing outside for a short constitutional each day would march gingerly in single-filed line over frozen ground. As the days shortened and tree branches grew bare, most animals would stay indoors, while the tone of the zoo paled from raucous to mumbling during what's known in the trade as the dead season, a time of animal rest and human repair. Even in its reduced wartime state, the zoo endured as a complex living machine, where one wobbly screw or stripped gear could trigger a catastrophe, and a zoo director couldn't afford to miss a rusty bolt or a monkey's runny nose, forget to lock or adjust the warmth in a building, overlook a bison's badly matted beard. All this became doubly serious during windstorm, rain, or frost. Missing now were all the women who used to rake fallen leaves, the men who insulated the roofs and stable walls with straw, the gardeners who wreathed the roses and ornamental shrubs to protect them from the frost. Other blue-uniformed helpers should have been cellaring beets, onions, and carrots, and topping off the silos with fodder, so that wintering animals could have plenty of vitamins, a word coined in 1912 by Polish biochemist Casimir Funk. Did not know that. That's cool. The barns should have been brimming with hay, the storerooms and pantries with oats, flour, buckwheat, sunflower seeds, pumpkins, and eggs. What? And other essentials. Trucks should have been carting in coal and coke and the black. Sorry, I say coal and coke, and all I can think is cocaine. Oh, I'm so terrible. Anyway, truck should have been carting in coal and coke, and the blacksmith fixing broken tools, weaving wire, and oiling padlocks. In the carpentry shop, men should have been repairing the fences, tables, benches, and shelves, and crafting doors and windows for added buildings when the ground softened in spring. Normally, Antonia and Jan would have been preparing the budget for the coming year, awaiting the arrival of new animals, and reading reports in offices angled to view the river and the steeply roofed houses of Old Town. The press department would have been organizing talks and concerts. Lab researchers would have been smearing slides and running tests. Dead season, though, never an easy time of year, usually offered gated asylum in a world private and protected, where they banked on a well-stocked larder, standing orders for foodstuffs, and a belief in self-reliance. The war undermined all three. The wounded city is trying to feed their animals, Antonia reassured Jan one morning as she heard a clop and clatter then saw two wagons creaking up to the gate with leftover fruit and vegetable peelings from kitchens, restaurants, and houses. At least we're not alone. No, Warsaurians know it's important to save their identity, Jan replied, and all the elements of life that elevate and define them, and fortunately, that includes the zoo. Still, Antonia wrote that she felt the ground disappearing beneath her when the occupation government decided to move the capital to Krakow, noting that as a provincial city. Warsaw no longer needed a zoo. Oh. All she could do was await the liquidation, a loathsome word suggesting a meltdown of creatures her family knew as individuals, not as a collective mass of fur, wings, and hooves. Only Antonia, Jan, and Rice remained at the villa, with not much food at any price, little money, and no jobs. Antonia baked bread every day and relied on vegetables from the summer garden and preserves made from rooks, crows, mushrooms, and berries. Friends and relatives in outlying hamlets periodically sent food, sometimes even bacon and butter, luxuries seldom seen in the devastated city, and the man who delivered horse meat to the zoo before the war procured a little meat for them now. One day in late September, a familiar face appeared at their front door in German uniform, an old guard from the Berlin Zoo. I've been sent directly by Director Lutz Heck with his greetings and a message, he said formally. He wishes to offer you help and awaits my call. Antonia and Jan looked at one another, surprised, not quite sure what to think. They knew Lutz Heck from the annual meetings of the International Association of Zoo Directors, a small clique of altruists, pragmatists, evangelists, and scoundrels. I know it's probably not what I think it means, but I hear the word scoundrel, and it feels like one of those things that it's like, which one of these does not belong? And scoundrel feels like it does not belong there. Anyway. In the early 20th century, there were two main schools of thought about how to keep exotic animals. One believed in creating natural habitats, the landscape and climate each animal would find in its homeland. The zealous proponents of this view were Professor Ludwig Heck of the Berlin Zoo and his older son, Lutz Heck. The opposing view held that, left to their own devices, exotic animals would adapt to a new environment, regardless of where the zoo was located. That does not sound right. The leader of this opposing camp, of course it is. The leader of this opposing camp was Professor Lutz's younger son, Heinz. director of the Munich Zoo. Influenced by the Hex, the Warsaw Zoo was designed to help animals acclimatize, and it also provided inviting habitats. It was the first Polish zoo that didn't cramp small animals into small cages. Didn't cramp animals into small cages. Instead, Jan tried to fit each enclosure to the animal, and as much as possible reproduce how it would live in the wild. The zoo also boasted a good natural water source, artesian wells, elaborate drainage systems, and a trained and dedicated staff. At the annual meetings, ideologies sometimes soured into feuds, but zookeeping families all gloried in their zoos and juggled similar concerns and passions, and thus a freemasonry of shared wisdom and well-being prevailed despite the language barriers. Other directors didn't speak Polish. Jan didn't speak fluent German. Antonia spoke Polish and some Russian, French, and German, but a sort of Esperanto, a Polish invention, arose that relied heavily on German and English, accompanied by photograph, freehand drawings, and animal calls, and pantomime. Annual meetings felt like reunions, and as the youngest zookeeper's wife, Antonia captivated them with her smarts and willowy looks, and they regarded Jan as an energetic and determined director whose zoo was thriving and blessed with rare offspring. Heck had always been cordial, to Antonia especially, but in his zoo work and now in his politics, he was obsessed with bloodlines, Aryan included. From what they had heard, he'd become an ardent and powerful Nazi, with Reich Marshal Hermann Göring and propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels. Oh God, that monster. As frequent house guests and hunting companions, that's just terrible company. We are grateful for Professor Heck's offer, Antonia replied politely. Please thank him, and tell him that we do not need help, since the zoo is destined to be liquidated. She knew full well that the highest-ranking zoologist in Hitler's government, Heck might be the very man in charge of the liquidation. The following day, to their surprise, the guard returned and said that Heck planned to visit soon, and when the guard left, they wondered what to do. They didn't trust Heck, but on the other hand, he was sweet on Antonia, and in theory, as a fellow zookeeper, he should be sympathetic to their situation. In an occupied country where survival often depended on having friends in high places, cultivating Heck made sense. Antonia thought Heck relished the idea of being her patron, a medieval knight like a Parsifal, some romantic ideal to win her heart and prove his nobility. As she wondered if his overture signaled help or harm, her mind filled with feline battery. For all we know, he may just be playing with us. Big cats need little mice to toy with. Sorry, that line just gave me an image of Lion King whenever I keep wanting to say Jafar, but it's Scar, and he's playing with that mouse on his hands like that, playing with the mice before he eats it. It says, "Don't play with your food." Sorry. Jan made a case for Heck's possible goodwill. As a zookeeper himself, Heck loved animals, spending his life protecting them, and undoubtedly sympathized with fellow zookeepers' losses. And so, poised between hope and fear, they passed the night before Lutz Heck's first visit. After curfew, Poles could no longer stroll under a canopy of stars. They could still watch August Perseids, followed by the autumn meteor shower. Oh, that is a meteor shower. Ha! That's actually coming up on Saturday, which is my birthday. Sorry, I'm getting distracted a lot. They can still watch August Perseids, followed by the autumn meteor showers, the Draconids, Orionids, and Leonids, from their windows and balconies. But thanks to all the shelling and dust from most days became cloudy with tumultuous sunsets and a drizzle before a dawn. Oh, that's a truck passing. Yeah, drizzle before dawn. Ironically, the raging warfare that created grotesque battlefields and pollution also inspired gorgeous sky effects. Now, fast falling meteors at night, however kite like their tails, conjured up images of gunfire and bombs. Once meteors had figured in a category of mind remote from anything technological, as wayfarers from distant realms where stars sparkled like ice-coated barbed wire. Long ago, the Catholic Church had christened the Perseids the Tears of Saint Lawrence because they occurred near his feast day. But the more scientific image of dirty snowballs pulled by invisible waves from the rim of the solar system, then yanked down to Earth, evokes its own saintly magic. I think that's a good place to leave off. So that's the end of chapter 7. So now we're on chapter 8, and I will read that at another time. So just gonna page mark that. People in the next car have been watching me this whole time, so I felt kind of weird. All right, so wow, 41 minutes. Good God. All right, so hope you like that, even though it's getting really depressing now. Oh well.